because they're going to be it's not just saying the lip service of saying they're the future. You have to help build them in that future and share the knowledge of the past to move forward and build the futures with them. Because they teach me a lot. So firstly, I pay my respects to my elders, past and present, and to our futures. But also I pay my respects to you, because you're the people that will be a part of these agents of change. These little people will be what you deliver to them. And it is about teaching. And it is about learning. And it's about how we share those things with each other. So in the language afforded to me, it's Wominjeka, Marambik Bik Bunurong, Namda Baruptan Arta Willem. That means welcome to our beautiful home, the lands of the two great bays, Nurm being Port Phillip Bay and Marin being Western Port Bay. This part of the country, because of the river, what you know as the Yarra, you're all from Victoria? The Yarra. It's also known to us as the Birrarung, the River of Mist. But Birrarung, when we go Gar, it means the country of the river. So this area is part of the country of the river. And it travels down from way up in the Yarra Valley and travels down, right down to what you know as Point Nepean. It's a big river. And it was a river, where I lived was the river country, but about 10 to 8,000 years, give or take. Science has proved that the river did actually run through there, and there's a massive waterfall at the end connected to where you come in from Geelong Way to Point Nepean. So that's something to think about when you're teaching little people about how you inform young people. And as a descendant of Melbourne's First Peoples, I welcome you. And the word Wominjeka means come, but you come with a purpose. And what's your purpose? Is to share and grow, because Wominjeka means come with a purpose. Everybody uses it as a welcome, but there's things that lie behind language. This land we stand today is the traditional country of the Iluk Weelam clan of the Bunwurrung language group. The Bunwurrung people were a part of a much larger confederacy known as the Eastern Kulin Nation. Eastern Kulin made up of 5 different language groups: Bunwurrung, Woiwurrung, Tanwurrung, Wathwurrung and Dja-Dja-Wurrung. So you're getting all that. Understanding there are differences, because the Wurrung is your tongue, how you speak of country, how you connect to country. The Bunwurrung and the Eastern Kulin have a unique history and culture, and we are pleased to celebrate that history and heritage with you today. Like I said, the Wominjeka is a word, Bunwurrung word. The 5 language groups use that word. They can spell it many different ways, because now we have to put it in a framework that we use international coding to be able to scribe our words, which were traditionally oral. Now we've got to write it so you can teach it. And being the International Year of Languages, something you need to know about country, because it'll inform you. Traditionally, like I said, the Bunwurrung and the other clans from the Eastern Kulin would meet to celebrate, to trade, to negotiate, and these great celebrations were held each month to celebrate the coming of the full moon, the 13 moons. The descendants of the Bunwurrung and the Eastern Kulin have continued to take an active and progressive approach to leadership and protection of our values And you'll probably see a lot of those values in your own workplace. We've just had them a little longer and we had different words for them. Like I said, that acknowledgement is one more way. When we do that Wominjeka, is one more way in which we can acknowledge and celebrate our shared Indigenous heritage. In traditional society of the Kulin, we were committed to that maintenance of that society by valuing the importance of learning, showing respect, celebrating life, and honouring sacred ground. And like we all know, the importance of learning. It was a transmission of knowledge and understanding that ensured our culture survived. This commitment to learning has been a part of every generation since time began. And it's one of the reasons why we are still strong today. We believe that you must understand or you must respect the past in order to understand its future. And recognise I'm talking about thousands of generations, not the 200, thousands, that has been impacting on being a part of this process. Showing respect. In our traditions, visitors are always welcome, but they're required to show respect to the laws of this country. This is the same way we show respect to each other's diversities, cultures, religious or spiritual beliefs today. The third value or principles of our guiding ways is about celebrating, and celebrating of life, the arrival of new children, the coming of the 6 seasons, the visiting of the neighbouring clans was very much an important part of our traditional life. This is not, come on, technology, it's not moving across, yeah. Calm. And the final one is about respecting self, but it's also about respecting self within, respecting sacred ground. We should all acknowledge the sacred ground on which we stand. And Melbourne is a host to many people from many different nations, different language groups, and we still call upon them to continue to respect sacred ground by understanding its history and the heritage of the first peoples of the Eastern Kulin. And today it is my hope that we can all take pride in this shared history and celebrate the strength of this great nation of ours. And according to our traditions, our lands will always be protected by our Creator, Bunjil, who travels as an eagle, and by Wan, who protects our waterways, travels as a crow. And that's what we talk with children. This informs us. Nature informs us. These were people that took on the spirits of our guiding lifeways in law. So we don't challenge anybody else's religious beliefs. We just accept that there's a difference, and people have a right to view their differences. Bunjil taught us to always welcome guests, but he required us to ask all guests to make number of dambals, commitments. 1, not to harm our big-bigs, our lands. Warni, not to harm our waterways. And the most important one is Bunjil's children, our bubups. And these, if you accept these laws, to obey these laws or these commitments, The commitment is made through an exchange of a small bow, dipped in the water of the land. So once again, Wominjeka, Marambik Bik, Bunurong, Namdeb, Barupton, Atta, Willem. So it is about celebrating that, valuing where you live, celebrating the First Peoples, because you will grow with it. We're changing the landscape and we're investing in how you work with our little people, because every little child is part of our journey. Not just because they're Aboriginal kids, they're all, everyone. It's Pan Kulin, Pan Australia. These children are about our well-being too. If they're well, we're well. So Nungujin, Wominjeka. So can you all say Wominjeka? Well, you're getting it, eh? You're learning, and it's the year of the languages, so I don't know why they only classify it once a year. Every year, is it? Well, they better invest in it. I've written a book on languages, but it's only in my region. So the teachers use that as a tool with their little people. And I've recorded it so they can get the sound system. And I've done all that. So next is grammar and then a dictionary. So we invest for our futures too. Because every culture around the world, I've got a grandson who speaks fluent Mandarin, because he is of that Manchurian, and he's speaking Spanish. So he's only 5. So he's comfortable, he has my language as well as his mother's language. So he's quite confident because he enjoys being confident, and this is how you value children. If they're safe within their own environment and their own family. And I've got another one in Sri Lankan. Gosh, where's this going? And the others are from, gosh, they're pan-national, around the world, international. So I'm very fortunate to have 9 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild. My eldest grandchild is 27. So the youngest is 8 months. So it's the little yum-yums at this stage. So, I'm good, Jim.
I'd just like to say thank you, Parbanata Carolyn Briggs, for the welcome to country. We thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule. And
I'm going to map this landscape now.
yeah, that's right. And for setting the tone for the conference today. So thank you very much.
You take care.
Will do.
And it has been a long history.
It has.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so just before we sort of get into the speakers, we just a few housekeeping things for today. The Wi-Fi, most important is Wi-Fi. So if you look for the Batman's Hill conference, and the Wi-Fi password is conference, all lowercase. I'm going to share with you very shortly in terms of why we want you to sort of log into the Wi-Fi today. Just in terms of emergency exits, there is an emergency exit just over there. We'll take that exit there, and then we'll follow around through the bar and the entrance where you came through, and the muster point is at Krispy Kreme Donuts. So let's look forward to having some donuts. Hopefully it doesn't happen. The other thing we want to bring to your attention too is that there are think sheets. Now a think sheet is a summary of the presentation. So each presenter has brought together a think sheet and it summarises the highlights from their paper. This will be emailed to you shortly after today. So we actually want you to just to sort of sit back and engage with the content and then have conversations at your table. After the end of each presentation, there will be some time for what we call table talk. And table talk is where we're going to ask you a question, and the question we're going to ask is, what was one key idea you took away from the presentation and how that might impact your practice? And there'll be also time for 1 or 2 questions from the floor after each presentation. Just in about lunch, so lunch, which is really important at any conference, Lunch will be served out in the sort of main bar area, and lunch is scheduled for 12:15. And so until 12:50, but we would ask you to come back at 12:45 so we can commence exactly on 12:50. That'd be great. The other thing here is we're also live streaming, so there's 100 people in the room today, but we also have around about 130 people joining us via live streaming across the state. So I'd like to acknowledge and welcome those people as well. And so why this conference? So beginning your career as a teacher brings with it some wonderful challenges and some amazing opportunities. The purpose of this conference is to support you as a beginning teacher in key aspects of your practice in a way that reflects and supports evidence-based practice and aligns to some important documents including the National Quality Standard and the Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework. We have brought to the stage today, and via some videos, some of the most inspiring speakers. I will in time introduce each speaker prior to their paper. But first, let's start with a video by the Deputy Premier and Minister for Education, the Honourable James Merlino MP, who will be sharing with you today a welcome via video. He sends his apologies for not being able to be here today, but sends his well wishes for a wonderful and productive day. So I'll cue the video now.
Hello, welcome to the Beginning Early Childhood Teacher Conference. Your first years in a new career are exciting and can be both rewarding and challenging. This is the first time we've held these conferences, and it's because we recognise the importance of supporting you on your early childhood teaching career. The skills and networks of support that you will build now will be the foundation of your profession in the years to come. I'm very proud that Victoria, the education state, is the first state in Australia to introduce universal kindergarten for 3-year-olds. This is the biggest reform in the state's history of early childhood education and will improve the lives of Victorian children for generations to come. The work you do will be at the very heart of this reform. The Victorian Government wants to make sure that right now and at every stage of your teaching career, you have access to the best quality professional learning and career support to grow your professional practice. This year's state budget includes $92.4 million to support the early childhood workforce. These supports include induction programs and professional learning for early childhood teachers at every stage in your career. This includes mentors for provisionally registered teachers, regardless of where you're located across the state, and funding to help you connect with your mentor so you can achieve full teacher registration. There are scholarships for people who are inspired by your example and decide that they too want to become an early childhood teacher. We're also offering scholarships for those of you who are already teachers and interested in postgraduate qualifications in early childhood education. And there are employment incentives for teachers to work in the locations where kindergarten for 3-year-old children is first rolling out. I encourage you to use today to connect with your teaching peers and build your professional networks. I hope this conference gives you valuable tools and insights and that you leave feeling inspired and energised about the next phase of your career. On behalf of Victoria's youngest learners and their families, thank you for all the work you do and making a real difference to their lives. This is an exciting time to be involved in early childhood education in Victoria, and I look forward to continuing to work with you to make Victoria the education state.
Great. Okay, so what we're doing today as well is there's a panel presentation later today. What we'd like you to do is throughout the day you can pose a question using our interactive app called Slido. So Slido will allow you to go in and pose a question. So the web address is www.slido.com. And the event number is 1115. So you'll go in, you'll be able to log into the event, and you'll start to be able to pose questions. What we'll do is that the questions are moderated, which means we'll actually look at the questions and and see which ones, because there might be multiple questions around the same topic, and then we'll pose those questions to the panel a little bit later today. So slido.com and event number 1115. So if you want to log into that now, I'll give you a couple of moments to do that before I introduce David, and then you can start posing questions as we go along today. How are you going, David? Ready? Okay. So our first presentation today is by David Gilks, and David has been in early years education for 25 years, primarily as a teacher working alongside 4 and 5-year-old children and their families in both Hobart and Canberra. David's leadership roles include Director of an Early Learning Centre and an Early Years Network Leader in the Tasmanian Department of Education. He now works full-time as an education consultant. The Reggio Emilia educational project and its provocation for the Australian context has inspired and challenged David for many years. He is the convener of the Tasmanian Reggio Emilia Network. In 2014, David was awarded a National Excellence in Teaching Award for Innovation in Early Childhood. The title of his paper is The Value of Otherness, Embracing Perspectives and Growing Together. Please join me in welcoming David.
Thanks, Colin. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here, to travel overseas to join you from Tasmania. We do get a bit of a hard time about it, but we are part of the country. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Yaluk Weelam people as the traditional custodians of this land on which we meet and learn today, and to pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. I'm going to get straight into it. We've only got 20 minutes, so I'm going to get straight into my paper. I'd like to start by proposing that we need otherness in order to grow. We need otherness in order to know ourselves and each other better. It's raining heavily, and our kindergarten day has started, as it always does, with a morning meeting. The 4 and 5-year-old children are offering some theories on how it rains. And Ellis says, "The clouds make rain." "Yes," agrees Meg. "The rain comes out of the rain clouds." "The sun gets all the water from the ponds, lakes and trees. The sun pulls it out of them. It goes into the clouds, and when the clouds get heavy, it rains. It's the sun that pushes the water up into the air. It evaporates. We can't see it happening because it's evaporating," says Oscar. Oscar's 4. "I believe in Oscar," says Rory. "No," says Dylan. "What do you think, Dylan?" "I think a giant stomps on the clouds, and then the rain comes down." "Yeah, there are giants in the clouds, right up high, right up to the moon, or something past the clouds," agrees Kobe. "They don't fall through the clouds because they're strong," adds Dylan. "His name is Angry Pants," says Fenella. "Have you got some ideas for how you can show me your thinking?" I ask. And so our day continues, and a rich inquiry exploring concepts such as change and emotion through the vehicles of rain and bad-tempered giants is born, and it continues for many weeks. Now, I've been an early childhood teacher for 25 years, working predominantly alongside 4 and 5-year-old children and their families. I've always prided myself on my pedagogical choices and practices, a pedagogy that I believe has been strongly grounded in relationships and socio-constructivism. I've drawn on the work of theorists and thinkers such as Dewey, Vygotsky, Brunner and Malaguzzi. How I aim to work each day, and hopefully evidenced in just this small snippet of a conversation, was to actively listen to the children, to create context for them to confidently express their different ideas and opinions, and to respect with each other in respectful and empathetic ways. I was comfortable in places of doubt and question and uncertainty. And I also was comfortable in places of abstract and fanciful. I encouraged them each day to build on each other's thinking, to challenge it, to think outside the box. I valued what they each brought to the group and what I brought to the group, and how the dynamics could be richer for our many voices and ideas. But something I came to realise very early on in my teaching career is that these same holistic ways of working, which I championed when I was learning and being alongside children and families, I needed to apply to the way in which I positioned myself with my colleagues and other professionals. Now, if I see children as competent and capable protagonists in their learning, each with their own unique ways of knowing and their multiple perspectives and their diverse backgrounds and experiences, then surely I need to see my colleagues and other professionals in the same way. If I value the well-being of others and acknowledge our interdependence and socio-constructivism as a way of making meaning and also creating a sense of belonging with children, then surely the same should be true for how I am with adults. So the Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework encourages us to be in partnership with professionals, to recognise and respect our diverse backgrounds and experiences, to communicate and collaborate effectively and build a sense of shared endeavour. This is supported by the Partnerships with Professionals practice paper written in 2011 by Flotman, McKernan and Taylor, who also say that working together can contribute to new knowledge about early childhood learning and development and help to overcome the divide between research, policy and practice. The National Quality Standard in Element 4, Quality Area 4, Element 4.2.1, recognises that management, educators and staff work with mutual respect and collaboratively and challenge and learn from each other, recognising each other's strengths and skills. This element highlights several things, including how our interactions can be guided by Early Childhood Australia's Code of Ethics, for example, and encouraging a lively culture of professional inquiry. AITSL Professional Standards for Teachers stress the importance of collaboration and engagement with our colleagues. In their Essential Guide to Professional Learning Collaboration document, they share the results of a 2013 OECD Teaching and Learning International Survey. And in that survey, it highlights that teachers who regularly participate in collaborative professional learning have a greater level of job satisfaction. So recent work, such as that collated by Niemi, Toom, Kalianiemi and Lavanen in 2018, remind us that we live in a constantly and rapidly changing society and that we need to work more and more with others and to innovate and constantly update our expertise. There's no doubt that the nature of our jobs is complex because we interact with so many people every day. Our co-educators, speech pathologists, psychologists, caseworkers, EAL teachers, the list goes on. What opportunities are there for me, with the values, ideas and experiences that I hold close and make me who I am, to not only see but to actively welcome otherness, to see this as a remarkable opportunity to grow professionally, to ultimately, and what's more vitally, be of benefit to the children and families alongside whom I work. As someone who sees learning as a process of co-construction and collaboration, as benefiting from the input of many disciplines, shouldn't I be fully embracing these perspectives and this knowledge, which is so often different from my own, in order to be the best educator I can be? It's important to remember that this doesn't mean losing sight of who I am and what I bring, but rather appreciating the beauty and fullness of being part of a diverse forest of ideas and experiences. So what do I mean by the value of otherness? Well, to be an educator is, I believe, to be open to otherness in our relationships with children, with families and colleagues. We do this through listening, through respect and trust, through having courage, which can also mean being vulnerable, through listening, through recognising interdisciplinary ways of knowing and learning, through empathy. The Collins Online Dictionary defines otherness as the quality that someone or something has which is different from yourself or from the things that you have experienced. It's the quality that someone or something has. Otherness is not bad. Carla Rinaldi, president of Reggio Children Loris Malaguzzi Centre Foundation, talks about otherness in relation to listening. She says listening is an ethics of encounter built on welcoming and hospitality of the other, an openness to the difference of the other, to the coming of the other. It involves an ethical relationship of openness to the other, trying to listen to the other from his or her own position and experience, and not treating the other as the same. How can we see our relationships with our colleagues and other professionals in this way? To open ourselves to otherness. To realise that to build bridges, you actually need people with a variety of different skills and on both sides of the river. There's no doubt that relationships are not always easy to initiate, navigate and maintain. And as a beginning teacher, I found myself in a number of situations where I felt quite overwhelmed, or at times even confronted by the differing perspectives or position of my colleagues. Otherness can be uncomfortable, and it can be really hard to stay true to what you believe in the face of otherness. But reflecting on my time starting out as a beginning teacher, there are a few things that really helped me, and I'd like to share some of those things with you now. The first thing that really helped me was the realisation that a perspective different from my own could ultimately only add to my own rich tapestry of understandings about a child, about a family, about learning or education. That in the majority of cases, my colleagues and other professionals and I had a shared destination, but the pathways we each could take and the lenses we each could look through could be quite different. And that was okay. In many ways, this meant being able to recognise myself as an ongoing learner, as an inquirer, as a researcher. Once I embraced this welcoming of the other as an exciting opportunity, rather than as a threat or as an assault to my values, the more possibilities and connections between us I could see, and the more the children and the families alongside whom I worked benefited. And instead of being a single log in the fire, I could be part of a collective bonfire of ideas. And my levels of engagement increased. I can remember several years ago working alongside a psychologist to support a boy in my class who had severe anxiety. During that time, I learned so much about how our brains work, and it was really fascinating to gain these insights. On another occasion, I worked quite closely with an artist in residence. Her way of seeing and knowing was through materials. It was exciting and deliciously messy to spend time with her. My knowledge was far richer for these different perspectives and this otherness. I've got a series of inspirational quotes on my pinboard in my study at home, and one of them says, "Life is about the people you meet and the things you create with them. So go out and start creating." And I think this is a really great way to think about how we can work together. The second thing that really helped me, and I think this takes time to feel comfortable with, was focusing on communicating with my colleagues and other professionals in a way that aimed to put the idea or the concept or the problem into the centre or middle of our discussions. In that way, we were debating the idea or the problem and not the person who held that idea. And there's a big difference. This changed the way I interacted with my colleagues, and my partnerships and relationships were strengthened as a result. Thirdly, I determinedly broke down in my head, but more importantly in my words and actions, any form of hierarchy in the way in which I worked and breathed. I could not imagine treating my co-educator, for example, any differently as a result of her designated job title of teacher assistant, or as her because of her Certificate 3 qualification or years of experience, for example. I would not ask anybody to do a job I would not be happy doing myself. I valued the cleaners' contributions as much as the centre directors. This is about what we all bring. This is about humility, this is about trust, this is about rights and respect. One of my favourite inquiry projects was one in which our school groundsman was actively involved. Our otherness makes us unique. It does not make us of more importance. We're all part of a community of learners. Fourthly, I actively sought out ways for my voice to be heard, to maximise my otherness. One of the ways I did this when working with my colleagues or other professionals was by trying to establish and articulate some shared parameters or understandings for communication and collaboration. This would often involve establishing some sort of agreement for how we might work together at the start of a meeting, for example, or developing a shared language based on things such as the Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework or the Early Years Learning Framework or the National Quality Standard, for example. Another way I tried to be heard was by actively involving myself on committees or in professional learning communities, particularly in areas in which I felt I had something to say. Now, I've got a background and an interest in the performing arts. So when I first started teaching, I volunteered for a committee that was looking at invigorating the school's arts program. This was an area in which I felt comfortable and at home. So in many ways, it was a softer and easier entry point for my voice to be heard. And what might be your comfortable place or entry point for getting involved? The other thing I did was to join networks, education networks or other networks outside of my workplace. Networks that could nourish me and support me and expose me to different people and points of view. That helped also to build my confidence with communication and collaboration. For many years, I've been a member of organisations such as Early Childhood Australia, the Reggio Emilia Australia Information Exchange. Those sort of networks really support and encourage my growth. Fifthly, I quickly realised that the only way that I could effectively design and develop learning environments or learning experiences and projects was together, not in isolation. I needed the perspective of the other or others in order to see my documentation more clearly, to interpret it and to make sense of how and why the children were learning in order to provide the context for the possible ways forward. Learning for children and adults is a process of co-construction. I could not do this alone. I cannot tell you the number of times when looking at a documented conversation or some anecdotal notes or a child's drawing, for example, that another adult offered me a perspective or a question or a possibility that I hadn't even considered. Or the times when we worked collaboratively with curiosity and wonder and allowed ourselves to more fully explore or come to know a particular material or concept. Those moments are joyous, those moments of dialogue and shared inquiry and positioning yourself alongside others as a teacher, as researcher. Ben Mardell from Harvard University's Project Zero talks about learning and inquiry as a team sport, and I think that's really true. Another thing that I came to understand quite early on was the idea that a challenging or negative experience with a colleague actually helped me to become stronger in what I believed and how I worked. These experiences, as rocky or as uncomfortable as they felt at the time, ultimately helped me to know my professional and personal self better. Many years ago, I was talking in the workplace staff room with a colleague about a child we both knew who was having some difficulties. Our conversation had barely begun when a colleague nearby piped in with, "Well, what would you expect from that family anyway?" Now, it took all my strength in that moment to handle the situation calmly, but I knew that I had to respectfully challenge that person's image or construct of these parents and their child. It was one of those moments that I actually came away from feeling quite shaky because this person who I challenged had been teaching for a lot longer than me. But I made myself a commitment at that time to always uphold a strong image of children and families in my staff room conversations and beyond. And also to say when I thought something wasn't okay. Challenging encounters with an other helped me to know myself better and what I stood for. Lastly, the thing that has helped me and continues to help me in more ways than I can ever really truly articulate was to find that special other who could be a friend, a mentor, a supporter, a listener, a provoker. As an early childhood teacher, it can be really easy to get caught up in the busyness of the everyday or even the every hour. It can be full on. But see if you can make yourself a commitment to dedicate and prioritise some big chunks of time to being with that other person. Because we all need that special other, that person who can raise us up, share in our joys and our bumps, reflect with us, and let us feel comfortable in our own otherness. So, some advice for welcoming otherness. Embrace those different pathways knowledge and perspectives. Debate the idea, not the person. Break down hierarchies. We're all part of a community of learners. Find ways for your voice to be heard, to network and to build connections. Design, document, wonder, inquire and research together, not in isolation. Try to view challenges as a way to know yourself better. And seek out and find time to be with your other or others. Angry Pants lives in a castle, says Vanilla. With his mum, says Sophie. But you can go in there. They're friendly giants really, says Clara. Being open to otherness asks us to lower that drawbridge, to lay down our shields and sound the trumpets of welcome. And it might even mean setting a rather large chair at the table for Angry Pants. But as the children frequently remind us, this can be done. How are you going to welcome the other? And what opportunities might present themselves for you to embrace new perspectives in your professional relationships for the benefit of children, families, your colleagues and yourselves? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to give you some time now to have some conversations at your table. So we'd like you to have a conversation around what was one key idea you took away from David's presentation and what might be the impact on your practice. Then we'll have some feedback around that and then we'll have some questions on the floor. I can see there's already some questions from our live streaming colleagues on Slido, so I'll ask those questions as well to David in a moment. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. We'll have some feedback and then some questions from the floor. Music, please. If you can just come back to the room. So throughout the day, when you hear that phrase, come back to the room, that's your cue to just finish up on the point you're discussing and come back into the room. Just some feedback from the table talk. What was one idea you've taken away from the presentation, and what might be the impact on your practice? Somebody. Hi, down the front. Big loud voice.
Question the practice, not the person.
Question the practice, not the person. Great, thanks for that. Hi over there.
I had the same.
Same? Yeah? Great, good. Anybody else? What were you...
Perspectives of others, refining your own family and children.
Yep. So other people's perspectives are really important in understanding and refining your own understanding of children and families. Great, perfect.
Just to give back to that other person and show your appreciation and get what you give and give what you get.
Great, perfect, great. Thanks for that. Now, some of you have been active with Slido. That's fantastic. We had one person say hello from their lounge room somewhere. So hello to you if you're watching. And so some of the questions here I've got, and I'm going to just ask David to join me now here, and I'm going to ask some of these questions from Slido. So these are questions posed by the people in the live streaming audience or here on the floor here. So one of the questions here is, what advice would you give to new graduate teachers when working with a team who has more working experience than you and feel reluctant to change?
Yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a big one. it's a big one. But one of those things that I actually find is this is where using what the children do and the things that you do with the children can actually be really powerful supports for your values and what you believe, and in many ways some of that can be done through that rather than you having to put yourself in that position, by actually sharing some of those things with your colleagues, or even not necessarily saying, here, have a look at this, but by looking at different ways that you might be able to share some of those things in your spaces or in your conversations that you have in your staff rooms, or just trying to break down some of those things where it's becomes about challenge. But if you do have to put yourself in that position of challenge, I think really coming back to what people obviously resonated with people, debating that idea and not the person is really, really important. To think about how you can put the problem or the concept into the middle of a discussion rather than making it a personal thing. I think as Australians as a whole, we take things quite personally and can get our backs up quite easily. And one of the things I always love when I've been able to go to Reggio Emilia in Italy is to hear them talk about confronto and this idea of, and they talk about this, putting this idea in the middle. And you can see some really discussions in the Italians where you go, wow, are you still friends? But it's because they value that idea of debating an idea or a theory or how and why the children are learning, rather than about it being a personal attack.
Great, thanks for that, David. There's another question here. What are some practical tips on how an individual ECT can help colleagues focus on collaboration and shift their focus away from hierarchy of qualifications?
Yeah, I think hierarchy is a really interesting thing, because obviously in any workplace you need somebody that's going to make the ultimate decision with things, but it's about how do you set up those situations where you can maybe have some conversations around what are our shared values, what are our shared visions, what's our shared image of children and families, so that it becomes about this shared language and this shared vision, rather than about this person being here and this person being here. So, because if you have that shared language, then you can feel quite happy with a person making an ultimate decision for you, because you've developed those strategies and you've developed those things together. So trying to find those opportunities to have more of that time, I think, is important.
Great. One last question, and I'm sorry we've got to one last question, so there's a few more questions here. But how can we empower colleagues to want to be active and create that community of learners?
Yeah, I think one of the things is to, I commented on how busy every day can be. It can be full on, as we know, but trying to find some of those times to actually remember that we're all people, and we're all, it's finding that time to sit down and have a cup of tea with somebody, or finding that time to socialise, or to realise that we're all people and we're all part of this together, so that you can have those conversations that are not necessarily always about, they take it into a different place, and they put it into a place of making it a little bit more relaxed, a little bit less stressful, a little bit about right and wrong. Trying to find those opportunities, I think, are really, really important, and finding that special other that I talked about as well, finding that person that can really be that mentor or that provoker for you.
Great.
Thanks.
David, join me in thanking David again. Keep those Slido questions coming. There was a question about some review notes from David's presentation. Just a reminder, there are thinking sheets that are coming out. The thinking sheets sort of capture most of the salient points of each presenter, and they'll be emailed to you shortly after the conference today as well. So what I'd like to do now is to welcome Wendy Shepherd. And Wendy, as a researcher and early years consultant, Wendy Shepherd brings a wealth of sector knowledge and expertise in pedagogical practice and projects that inform and transform practice. Wendy is the founding director of Mia Mia Child and Family Centre, located at Macquarie University in New South Wales. She has and remains committed to ensuring quality education is afforded to all children through a focus on research and practice. The title of her presentation is Relationships Are. Please join me in welcoming Wendy to the stage.
Thank you, Colin. Well, good morning, everyone, here, there and everywhere. And thank you, the Department of Victoria Education, Department of Education and Training, for providing this conference for beginning teachers. It's and such a celebration of teachers and of early childhood education. So my talk, Relationships Are, I want you to think what does pop into your head when you hear the word relationship. I know when I read the word partnership, that popped right out. I resisted it because it has such a commercial connotation, and I don't think it sits well in the educational area, especially early childhood. So, let me begin. Relationships are based on respect, and I acknowledge and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Yalat Wurrung people and those with us today. Apologies if I have that incorrect. Relationships, though, are at the heart of being human, and they are integral to our being and our identity. Relationships are the glue that connects us and creates community. And relationships are core to our pedagogy and practice and underpin and enhance our work with children and families. Relationships are both personal and professional, and we have the responsibility to ensure that we maintain positive, healthy relationships in all spheres. Your professional relationship with the Victorian Department of Education and Training is being nurtured today with this professional development opportunity to enhance your nascent skills, knowledge, expertise and proficiency. Relationship building with children and families is, I'm very aware, part of finding your skills, confidence and courage about this, at times confronting and difficult responsibility. I remember very sharply as a young teacher. I was so uncomfortable in approaching family members because I was just beginning to find out who I was as a teacher of young children. And I thought, building relationships with children, how hard can that be? Well, I was wrong on both counts. Families had more holistic, nurturing goals for their child than I did at that time. And also, children need you to be in tune with them, to be in harmony with them. At this stage of my professional life, now that I'm older, I could say my relationships with children and families over the years have made teaching the most rewarding and satisfying career. Early on, I learned I had to step up and connect, even though I felt inadequate, ill-equipped, and actually very shy. Relationships with young children and families are a mandated responsibility, but relationships must transcend a narrow, prescribed professional responsibility. Connecting with families, I quickly discovered, is the most important step that you can take in your career, because we all have very much in common and we all have the best interests of the child as our starting point. That's your common ground. So I gradually came to the realisation that you are more than a teacher of children transmitting and exchanging educational knowledge. I was becoming the significant other in the lives of these families and children as we shared our hopes and values, life events and daily experiences. And as someone once said, we gradually sewed each other into our hearts. My epiphany was a phone call from China. Could I speak to Wendy, please? Speaking. Wendy, do you remember a young boy, who would only draw aeroplanes every day? I didn't have to stop and think. I knew instantly, yes, Joseph, I do remember you, and I remember that you drew those aeroplanes in great detail. Well, I'm here to tell you that I'm coming back to Sydney and I'm going to be studying aeronautical engineering. So, our relationships are memorable. They are the stories of our teaching. Teaching is an age-old profession, and most importantly, it is a profession that involves not only your mindfulness, your skills, expertise and knowledge, but also your heart. As you work with very young children who are at the beginning of their lives and the beginning of their family lives, educating and nurturing young children is a shared responsibility with the child and their family, and the equitable sharing of power. Power and how it is used in relationships, I soon learned, as proposed by Job 2017, is fluid and dynamic. Children understand and use power as effectively as adults. So it's wise to model power with rather than power over. The Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework acknowledges the importance of relationships, our connectedness, and the impact on the lives of children now and into their future. As I said before, relationships are not just a responsibility. They are the markers of our life lived. Benchmarks for quality and professional responsibilities are a guide only, not a narrow prescription for practice. Reason being, children and the family is unique and thus require particular, not generic, connections within the early childhood setting. Now, Ality 2010 believes there are implications for practitioners for counteracting reductive interpretations. It is as well to remember early childhood teachers are the first contact families have with an educational institution. Our very first encounter, without fail, must be an encounter of welcome and respect, and an investment in the building of a long-term caring relationship for sharing that responsibility for for the education and nurturing of the child. That first contact sets the tone of the relationship. That first good morning or good afternoon or may I help you question may engage the child and family and begin the becoming of the significant other in the family's life. Or will your not so warm greeting distance the child or family and consolidate for them that feeling of not being welcome, not belonging, of being other? How do you greet and welcome children each day and help them feel they belong as you settle them in, even when you have 20, 30 other children to care about? How do you explain all of those protocols to families when they come to visit? And how do you explain you must come and watch practice, experience the setting, observe what's going on, so you decide whether we're suitable or not for you before registering on the waiting list. On enrolment, how do you discuss the orientation and settling in process for the child and the family's responsibility in that process? For you, maybe the 100th time that you've said all of this, but for this family who is at your front door or on the phone, this is their very first time. They'll be feeling reserved, tentative, or intimidated. And the same holds true for children when they enter a classroom every day. So, here is your opportunity to be an absolutely fabulous and extraordinary teacher, ambassador, advocate for your organisation, early childhood education, and your profession. You have the opportunity to build community, which is valuable contributions to a civil society. Family queries about the possible support for their child with a disability, or the capabilities of your staff working with children who don't have English as a first language, or what security measures are there for a family with family law court orders, the safety of a child with a life-threatening food allergy, or the need for fee relief. These are just some of the queries that will have come your way. Your knowledge and capabilities need to provide a sense of ease and confidence that this family, this child, no matter what problems or issues they face, they'll be welcomed, valued, and ultimately belong in your setting. But the setting's philosophy, policies, forms, procedures, and practice should reflect the agreed upon values for respectful relationships. Each member of the micro early childhood community should become familiar and fluent in the language and the ethics of encounter and of welcome and of relationships. Same-sex families, grandparents, guardians, adopting families, surrogacy families, extended blended families, Indigenous families, refugee families will be instantly excluded if confronted with a form that asks for information that follows the norm, forms that require the name of the mother, the father. The information in the newsletters might not be relevant to their life, which suggests, as Bleach 2019 explains, some families may gain the feeling that they will be required to become invisible once enrolled, as they do not appear to conform with all of the requirements that the dominant discourse infers. For example, the requirement to have a certain number of emergency contacts is hard for families newly arrived to the country, let alone the community. The practice of holding Mother's Day and Father's Day events should give way to family events, as there are many ways to be a family, and there are too many indicators in thoughtless practice that perhaps some families are not acceptable as they sit outside the norm, and children understand this hidden curriculum value very well. Families come to us in multiple, cultural, diverse and complex structures. So do we. Acknowledging and respecting other ensures we can respond meaningfully to the unasked question, what represents, respects and values my family in this setting? Who of us is represented here? Family information sessions held regularly are forums where prospective families can comfortably ask those questions that often go unasked. Encounters such as these move us forward into sharing experiences and an unfolding and overlapping of lives and relationships that are to be lived out in this shared space. In reality, relationships with both children and families are on a continuum of difficult, tricky, ambivalent, right through to meaningful. Patterson and Kosher 2019 advise, legacies of fear and mistrust may be relevant for many families, but we must not conflate stories to presuppose what will best support every constellation of individuals. I remember a family member, a dad, coming to collect his child each afternoon. He would greet staff politely, but then go right over his child and inspect carefully from top to toe. Then he'd gather up the belongings and he'd leave. Staff were very challenged by his actions and they were at a loss as to what to say. Instead of reading the action as care and concern for his child, we presumed it was an act of distrust of their care. So this was a tricky situation, as they all had a positive relationship with the mother, who would drop the child off each morning and settle the child in, happily passing information positively and warmly. So what did the staff do about this ethical dilemma? At the next team meeting, the situation was discussed and the discourse of parentitis was underpinning the explanation of the event. Instead of asking the question, why might the parent feel the need to check the child, there were feelings of disenchantment with his behaviour and of not being trusted. Eventually, though, the question about our behaviour was raised. Did we support the father in the inspection of his child to ensure he felt less stressed about collecting his child and possibly finding that bump or scratch? We did only consult with the mother. We only rang the mother if the child did have a bump or a scratch. We had in fact excluded the father. So from then on, we included the father as well as the mother with any communication, and staff began to support the father in his rituals each afternoon. We actually learnt a lot from this tricky situation and with other problematic relationships. For example, the constant reporting to a family about their child with behavioural problems. We realised after some critical reflection we never reported on a good day for the child, and we rarely praised the child for something well done. No wonder the family avoided our contact and the child continued to live up to his problematic behaviour. Realising the need to maintain contact and repair the relationship, we decided to communicate to the family about this wonderful thing that the child did, no matter how fleeting, and to acknowledge our support for glimpses of the child's positive behaviour. This changed the anxiety level of the two mums and created a bridge for an authentic relationship to flourish with the family and the child, and their eyes began to shine with hope again. Critical reflection on our behalf always contributed to a more open and responsive relationship. We realised families would either indicate through their behaviour what they would not say, and that was, we weren't living up to our deal. We weren't respectful or reciprocal or equitable. We held the power of knowledge. We needed to be more observant and more critical of our practice with children to ensure power equity. I also learnt that it was wise to talk to families on their very first visit to our program about the fact that accidents happen and that children's development might not travel along without some bumps in the road. I also explained to families, that families, children and staff all have rights, but we also all have responsibilities in our relationships with each other, and that we must speak honestly. So difficult, tricky, ambivalent relationships are challenging to the core, but so worthwhile the emotional energy and investment in turning a distrusting relationship into a trusting relationship. But a positive, harmonious culture in the early childhood setting ensures relationships with children and families are respectful and able to thrive. Relationships amongst staff must also be respectful and equitable. This is particularly relevant for young children who are in the process of developing their relationship building skills and learning to regulate their behaviour. Children have no choice about being in our environments, therefore they should be, as Cooper 2019 describes in her research of high-quality early childhood educational spaces, places of harmony, collective leadership and collegiality, and of manakatinga, which is a Maori word for care, respect and hospitality. Hospitality, I think, takes on a new meaning in the context of an educational setting. Something to think about. So, postnatal depression, the stats are 1 in 5 women suffer this far-reaching mental health issue, and it has a huge impact on families. Family relationships breaking up, unemployment, domestic violence, homelessness, assessment of children, financial problems are just some of the real-life stresses that families face. Remember, there are professional boundaries and privacy is non-negotiable. Your role is not to fix the problem, but your role is to know where to access the support and to help families access that support. E-relationships. In the current climate of social media, be aware of its limitations and the practice of relying on e-communication only. Let it be a supporting strategy, not the only strategy for building relationships. Personal connections are vastly more important. You know immediately how a person or a child feels when you talk with them. You see instantly the emotions that are felt when you talk to a family about a problem. Human beings are unique and able to show emotion. Let's not rely on digital technology for our human connections. Relationships with children and families are built on, begin with and end with respect, reciprocity, trust and equity. How do you avoid the culture of a them and us, or the discourse of parentitis, even if it is only with one child, one family? How to move forward along the continuum of relationships from difficult, tricky, to a more satisfying, authentic, meaningful and equitable relationship. It really is up to each one of us. What first step will you take in critically reflecting on the culture of relationship building in your daily practice? We should always be trying to do better, even if you are great at building relationships. Have you checked in with anyone lately to ask them how they perceive your relationship building skills? How are you becoming the significant other in the lives of children and their families? And what stories will you have sewn into your heart? Thank you.
Wendy. Just that. Keep your microphone on, Wendy. Okay, so again, some table talk. So again, what was one key idea you took away from the presentation and what might be the implication for your practice? Keep the Slido questions coming. I can see a few there. And Bernadette has the roving mic. So when we come back to feedback about the table talk, then Bernadette will bring the microphone around to you. We'll give you about 5 minutes or so to do that, and then we'll come back and share.
Thank you.